Hello everyone, my name is Cece and I am the Genetic Canary if you've been following me for a little while. So welcome to this edition of I am really just going to be talking about what I have tried thus far to help my Huntington's / V injury, and I will totally get into some of that. As you can see, my hand is kind of reacting a lot today. So I do have some things I still need to heal. Like I still have movements in my arm. I no longer have them in my legs. Occasionally I still have them in my face, but it's very rare that I have it in my face. So let's just get started and get going on what I have tried so far. So I've pulled up my blog here so that I can kind of have a guideline to go through and kind of explain some things that I have tried. So, all right. So, it looks right here that I tried a cannabis, coconut oil, and salve. I definitely still use some cannabis oil on my arm, especially when it's in moments like this, and it will help it just kind of relax. And it does absolutely help. I also do these kind of things with my hand, and I'm also I have a physical therapy unit, I guess you would call it, a playlist on YouTube that really goes over some of the things I do for physical therapy, especially when it's like this. So, but that's something I'm going to start getting into and doing more on a daily basis now that I've healed the rest of my body. I really feel like this part needs to be worked on so that I can get it to relax. I no longer make cannabis oil with period. But I definitely, when I was still making it at the end, I did not make it with coconut oil. I'm really a firm believer, and if you watched my video on carnivore for mold illness or Huntington's disease, then you will understand more about why I no longer use coconut oil. Okay, let's get moving on. I made an analgesic bomb at one point with different essential oils in it. At this point, I no longer make anything like that because I don't use a crock pot. That's back when I've used a crock pot. I've since found out that there's lead in a lot of the ceramics for crock pots, so I don't do that. I do know that there's some stainless steel crock pots though, and I haven't really checked into those, but that might be something you could think about making a balm in or a salve in. But instead, what I've been using is I look for an organic form or a more natural form of tiger balm, and that seems to really help me with the eucalyptus oil and the peppermint oil and all of that it has in it. Not only does it help my hand, but it also helps my spleen due to the ingredients. And anybody who has Huntington's disease knows that our chromosome is affected at chromosome 4, which affects the chromosomes after that. Chromosome 6, it has to do with the spleen, and that has to do with whether or not you're getting the correct antigens in your body. So that is what I have learned about why I've learned so much about the spleen, because the spleen really has to do with your pain levels. If your pain levels are too high, that's because your spleen is acting up due to something that you ate. It actually, or that it causes inflammation in there, and which causes an increase in pain. For that, what I have done is I have noticed that if I use some essential oils dispersed into the air like aromatherapy, that if I use lemon, peppermint, or eucalyptus, and even clove sometimes, that will actually help relieve my pain. So just a little tipsy for those who are looking for something a little bit more natural. Okay, GMOs and organic food. I no longer eat just organic food. And let me explain that. Well, since I'm just eating mostly carnivore foods and I don't really eat a lot of plant foods, I don't really go for anything. Okay, let me put it this way. If I'm buying a plant food, I will purchase it organic simply because it has less pesticides. But on a regular basis, I don't do that with meat. I don't buy organic meat. I just buy what I can afford, which is regular traditional grain-fed meat. Now, while that sounds really terrible, because I know, because I was a former March Against Monsanto leader, that the grains that they feed the cows are GMO. I understand this. However, I also understand from the level of hearing from my favorite doctor on the subject, which is Dr. Ken Berry, and hearing from my favorite nutritionist, which is Nutrition with Judy, that the levels of wellness dictated by organic meat are so minimal that it doesn't really make a lot of difference whether or not I eat organic and grass-fed meat or if I eat not organic and grain-fed meat. So I choose to do what I can afford, which is grain-fed meat. So that is what I'm using, and I'm still getting better. I still healed. Let's talk about the different things that I've healed thus far. When I started out this journey, I had ADHD and bipolar. I still believe I have a little ADHD where it's a little hard for me to concentrate sometimes, but other times I can concentrate like a boss. So I don't know, either that's getting better or I think that's getting better. Bipolar. I no longer have any cyclical ups and down kind of situation. It's not extreme the way it used to be. I really believe that had a lot to do with my food choices at the time. Consuming too much fast food, consuming sodas, consuming sugar, like the regular standard American diet. At that time, that's what the symptoms were giving me from the food I was eating. So let's see. I no longer have restless leg syndrome, which is something I've struggled with since I was a baby, my mom said. Since she said when I was a little baby in my crib, she could hear me or in my, not my crib, but the one before that, the little bassinet. She could hear my little foot just going back and forth, and doctors couldn't tell her why. Well, that was my Huntington starting out at a really young age, as we know, right? So, because it does start in the womb. So, and I believe it starts with what the mama eats. So that's really interesting. At least that's what I believe. Now, that's what I believe based on all the research that I've done personally. So I'm trying to get my children to eat as healthy as they can because I have 2 daughters. So, what else have I cured? I cured, and this is all, not all of it is with the doctor, the bipolar. I never went back for a conclusion to the bipolar diagnosis because I figured I have Huntington, so is there a conclusion in their eyes? Probably not. So, I did, however, go to a doctor for blood test and blood work for all these other things I was having. So I've had hypothyroidism since I was pretty young, and that has been taken away now. I no longer have a problem with that due to the food that I ate. This all happened after 2018 when I turned carnivore, and it wasn't until 2020 that I got the results back that all of these things were gone. So diabetes is gone. I had diabetes too. I had parathyroidism, which increased my calcium levels. I had high calcium levels for over a decade. And I believe that may have been why my seizures started in the first place. But that is actually all gone. I also had parathyroid cysts, and if you don't know what parathyroids are, they're the tiny thyroids. You have 4 of them, and they're the tiny thyroids that are behind your regular thyroid, and they're called parathyroids. And they are in charge of your calcium in your body. So if you're having osteoporosis or something like that, you might want to consider checking your calcium levels and how that's going for you, because it does indicate parathyroidism. So I did have cysts, and I did get an ultrasound to determine it was gone. So yay for that. Totally gone. Awesome. I was so happy. But what surprised me the most was my non-alcoholic fatty liver disease levels were completely normal. I no longer had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and I had had that since 2008. So I was just floored that that was gone. So I have healed so much in my body. I also healed, for those of you who don't know, a long time ago, I was in a wheelchair 6 years ago. So that is actually a recent anniversary of that, of giving away my wheelchair, because I gave it away in February 2016. So, wow, I have healed so much. So let's continue on the things that I have done and the things that I haven't done. I did an herbal cleanse at the very beginning of my journey. And the herbal cleanse was supposed to be for Candida. I gotta say, even though my Candida levels are much improved, so many years later since I started this, because this blog post is from 2013, it's much improved, but this particular cleanse didn't do anything for me. It's called a Thessalon Cleanse, and I bought it at Natural Grocer at a natural health food store. It's an herbal cleanse, and I totally understand why it didn't work now. It has fiber in it, and anything with fiber in it, I have noticed in my journey, is really, all it does is cause huge amounts of inflammation in my body. And so if there's inflammation going on in your body when you're trying to do a cleanse, then it doesn't really work. So at least that's been my experience. So my experience has been more like the cleanse that I've had from eating meat, or cleanses that I've had from doing coffee enemas, have been the best cleanses that I could do. Now, coffee is the only plant I will still consume, but I only consume it by enema. I no longer consume it by mouth. This is a somewhat recent change. I decided to cut out all dairy, and I need dairy for my coffee, so I cut out coffee. But I also cut it out because coffee is it can affect your nervous system because it is an upper. And so because of that, I thought, well, I don't really need any more influence in my neurological system, so I just want to cut it out and see how I do. Well, since I've cut that out and I've cut dairy out, I have seriously noticed a serious decrease in my pain every day. Now, just as a reminder, I don't take any pharmaceuticals at all. The only thing I take for pain is the essential oils that I've discussed, and cannabis, as well as CBD. So I smoke cannabis and I vape cannabis. Okay. Drinking warm lemon water twice a day. I actually drink warm things all day long. Warm things really help my digestion, and they do help everyone's digestion. And this is something I learned in my research on the spleen. The spleen really needs a few things to help it. Lemon oil and lemons in particular do help the spleen. Not only does it help the spleen, but it also helps the kidneys. The lemons are also known as a more acidic food, which is really good for an acidic gut, like many of us do have with these genetics that we have. Huntington's disease has very specific genetics. We are different than other people. From what I understand and some of the research that I've looked up, I believe that we are Rh negative based or weak D. And a lot of us are either Rh negative or we present as Rh positive, but we're really Rh negative. And so I'll have to get into that a little bit later from what I've discovered, that a lot of people with Huntington's disease are chimeras. And you can be a chimera in certain different ways. One, you can absorb your twin in the womb. You can actually absorb them. And that's usually a fraternal twin that you absorb. Or you can absorb some of the Rh negative properties from the mother. And that is something that is really, really fascinating to me. So I will get into that later. But the reason why I mention it here is because a lot of people with Huntington's disease also have anemia. And when you have anemia, it means that you can't, your ammonium is not expressed across your red blood cells properly. And when it is not expressed across it properly, then you have anemia. Well, what does anemia mean? Anemia means that some of your blood cells are going to die, basically, because they aren't operating properly. And in Huntington's disease, we have a large clump that clumps together, and then they all die off at once. So if you can help anything to help your anemia levels, then that's really awesome. And I've noticed that eating fish does that, because I looked up the scientific research that says that fish convert, and you can find this by looking up Rh negative information. The fish actually will help excrete, it will help transmute the ammonia into ammonium, which is what we need to express it across those red blood cells. So drinking